I want to thank those of you that have joined us in the meeting today. And I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. Mi'kma'ki is the ancestral unceded past, present, and future lands of the Mi'kmaq. I recognize and am deeply respectful of their ongoing stewardship and bone-deep connection to these lands, waters, and ecology. As a newcomer and immigrant to their territory, I actually immigrated to Canada, and I am a citizen, but it was a long time ago. And I am responsible and commit to learn, support, honor, and combat erasure of Mi'kmaq enduring presence and contributions. All rights to data rediscovered as a result of my fieldwork done on the western side of the Atlantic Ocean, because I also do fieldwork on the other side of the Atlantic, my nation being Wales, belong to the first people of Turtle Island. My interpretations of the data in the following presentation are not the last word. This right, of course, belongs to the Mi'kmaq. This particular presentation honors the memory of highly respected Mi'kmaq elder and grandmother, Elizabeth Harriet Marshall of Eskazoni, who sadly passed away last year, and is also dedicated to her people, the land defenders at Hunter's Mountain. The title of the presentation is Mi'kma'ki, a Living Map, and it's presented to the Nova Scotia Wild Flora Society, October 27th, 2025. My name is Mary Macaulay, and I'm a qualified eco-archaeologist and professional environmental engineer. The location of the territory under consideration, as recognized right now by the Mi'kmaq people, is Mi'kma'ki, and it's on the eastern side of Canada and tucks in a little bit into Maine and encompasses all the Atlantic provinces and parts of Quebec up into the Gaspé region and down and down further south. So this is a snapshot of 5 years of threatened species found by me during my fieldwork during the 40-day comment period on Crown land that's scheduled for harvest. I also have done work prior to this, but this is the field work that has been recorded on the wonderful source for me and other naturalists and scientists called iNaturalist. And so I've been able to pull them out using their mapping facility. But I also want to explain that I'm not only out there looking for archaeology as an eco-archaeologist, looking for cultural evidence on the landscape, but I'm also keeping my eye open for threatened species. And I'm very grateful for others that are out there doing that as well. I'm just hoping that after watching this presentation all the way through, or even if you can only catch a bit of it here and there, that you will change some of your practices in terms of how you're recording the species that you find here in Mi'kma'ki and maybe elsewhere, because some of our findings, I believe, will be transferable. And that is, if you could please record the direction of the slope of the topography of the land, and also the direction using just WWS maybe for west-west south or east-east north as you upload your photographs. Thank you. It's really important for everybody to get out of the headspace that considers the Native people that were here thriving at the time the Europeans arrived and beyond as being savage. They had tailored clothing, So they weren't out on the land all the time struggling to make a living. They had time to make wonderful, creative, ornamental clothing, basketry, and other things that unfortunately have been taken and stolen from context. And they are still here. And they are still very much engaged with their culture and with especially their symbology and their ceremonies. And they are taking the time to try and regain that culture by pulling them out of museums where they have been hiding or hidden all around the world, including Australia. So now let's get into the botany, guys. What I've done here is I've just gone, and anybody can do this. You can find these particular types of landscape features all over Mi'kma'ki because they're a cultural signature. So what we've got here is an actual area that we're going to use as representative of life in a small, self-sufficient Mi'kmaq inland community. Okay, and underneath it, as revealed by LiDAR, you can see that there are lots of regular mounds, and those are the foundations of dwellings. And there are beautiful roads, regular engineered roads that are cultural features. There are cultural channels, etc. So this is a landscape that has been modified by the Mi'kmaq. Just wanted to tell you that these type of footprints are throughout Mi'kma'ki, and you can go onto the LiDAR set, which is public, and find them very easily and quickly. So I've also overlain here the topography so that you can see that this particular community, the roads went down steeply here. They went up slowly here. There is a high area here. Okay, so you can see that just from overlaying the topography on the LiDAR. So 5 cycles of land clearing is what the Mi'kmaq tell me, and what is documented has happened over most of Mi'kma'ki. But more recently, industrial ecocidal deforestry, which also includes bulldozing, clear cutting, soaking the land in poisons, is meaning that the likelihood of the ecology, the natural ecology bouncing back is becoming increasingly unlikely. So we're back at our aerial photograph of our model community. And these are some of the features in the community. There are roads. There's a harbor with a trail coming up from the front door harbor. There's a backdoor harbor for private access. We have a fish holding and feeding pond with a fish ladder that is leading up into the fish holding and feeding pond. There's a berry garden that is part of this particular model community, a sugar bush, a beech orchard, and there are various gathering places marked by an X, and of course, burials. The burials are extremely important in the ecology because, and we will get into some details of this, but when there's a community that has been in an area for millennia, this means that there are going to be exponentially more dead people occupying your footprint than live. And this is true everywhere, and how you treat the dead can become very important in the ecology. Beside these cul-de-sacs, which are features which are associated with burial preparation, the active one will usually also have some kind of place where people can wash the dead. And the burials are everywhere. And yes, for those of you who have suddenly the light bulbs gone on, these little places were permaculture communities. And when could we see these actively working as wonderful places to live here in Mi'kma'ki? They were widespread on Crown lands until forced centralization in the 1940s. Now, they worked a lot better 200 years before this because in a couple of hundred years before this, the settlers hadn't managed to completely exterminate the caribou that were here and bring our moose to the point of extinction. When they were here, they were also part of this community. They were living right here with the Mi'kmaq, and they were, you know what? I'm not going to spoil it for you. We'll get into that. All right. So here we go. How did the Mi'kmaq thrive on such a small patch of land? And can we model this way of life today? We talked about, I've done a couple of presentations on this subject. We talked about how the Mi'kmaq weren't using paved roads like we were to get around. They manipulated and managed water. That was their mode of choice. And when you're using water, and when you feel that water is sacred, which they do up until this very day, water is a great thing to promote health. Everything needs water. So if that's part of your culture, you're halfway there. So in this talk, we're going to talk about something different. We're going to talk about how bone veneration and their treatment of bones, and this is illustrative of what we can do with bone if we treat it right, was a huge part in the thriving ecology that the Europeans arrived at when we finally reached Mi'kmaq. So the key belief that resulted in bone being managed and manipulated in a way that boosted and continuously boosted and buffered the soils and the ecology on the land, and also buffered the waters, was that bone matter hosts enduring spirits. And this is a key core belief of the Mi'kmaq. So according to someone who is still considered one of the leading ethnographers of the Mi'kmaq, and I've seen this also in the literature and when I go into the archives, the Mi'kmaq did not did not burn the bones of the moose, beaver, and caribou, and they wouldn't allow the dogs to chew on them. And this is because they believed that the bones were still hosting the spirits, and that if they did so, the spirits would go back to their people and tell them, you had better not let the native people catch you. Okay, and the same discussion was had between a Mi'kmaq leader out of Prince Edward Island, what we call Prince Edward Island now, to the French priest Pierre Maillard in 1740. He was also someone who recorded a lot of his discussions and observations of the Mi'kmaq people. And not only does he talk about what they did with the land bones, but also the bones of the sea that came from the sea had to be thrown back in the sea. And so here we are. We have a people that believed that bone matter was so important that it should not be burnt, that it should not be chewed on, that it should not be wasted. And that was because of the spirits that were in there. What I haven't seen discussed in the ethnographies, but it makes complete sense, is that this veneration of bones by the Mi'kmaq also encompassed human remains. Of course it did. If they believed that animals and fish, if that spirits were in the bones, of course they believed that they were in their own people. So we're going back to our model community, and we're going to discuss each activity area in the community and the big picture of this model community hopefully will become ever clearer as we go ahead and discuss it. So these wonderful roads that the Mi'kmaq made, hard to say that, and are evident all over what we call Nova Scotia, are not logging trails. They were not put there for logging purposes originally, and they were not put there by the settlers. There's a clear cultural indications that these are cultural features, and we don't know when they were first installed, but the trails are very straight, they're even width, they're leveled, they're edge and surface troweled with some kind of cementitious material. They're very interesting for someone like me, of course, who has such a history with the concrete industry here in Nova Scotia. And you just do not see potholes on these roads. There are when you're able to get one like this, which is rare because most of them are overgrown, covered in lichens, or either that or they've been bulldozed. You can see that there's gravel in there underneath the cementitious material, and I've seen some of them dug up. So I have a question mark beside the base because I haven't seen all of them dug up. But they appear to have a quartz rich chunk base to them. And what this means, and this explains a lot, is that water underneath these roads would, by piezoelectricity, would have melted, and you wouldn't have experienced the freeze thaw that we get and all the potholing that we get with our wonderful roads here in Nova Scotia, which are famous for not being good. And as I said, we really don't know how long this culture of road building was here, but we can say that these roads are very cleverly engineered cultural features. Just a reminder that as far as I'm concerned, we've established that cultural concrete was widespread in Mi'kma'ki. We see things like this. There's what I call a pinkcrete footing on one side of a channel, and there would be another pinkcrete footing on the other side. And it's pretty clear that from the depressions in the pinkcrete footing, that there was once a bridge that went across the channel. So we see that kind of thing. And we also see clear evidence that, so this would have been a boulder. This is a boulder that is of about the right size for a strong man to move. And it was originally formed by stuffing cementitious material into some kind of probably animal skin sack, and then tied at the top, and probably used as maybe a boat weight. So wooden boats had to be sunk in the wintertime so they wouldn't be damaged. So maybe, because this was found lakeside, so maybe that's what that was for. And then, of course, over the centuries, the skin that was holding that cement would have rotted away, and there you have a lovely boulder with evidence that it was formed culturally. So what about these reindeer lichen trails that we see? We still see branching off from the main roads. Often now, unfortunately, the main roads have been cleared of the lichens. I'm not sure exactly what's happening there, but I suspect chemicals and, throwing different chemicals, spraying them, etc. But you still see these trails, these branch trails full of cladonia species heading off into the woods. The cladonia itself would not have been a cultural planting, but they are indicative of that the culture was nearby. Oh, I hear somebody trying to say something. No? Okay, sorry. If you want to say something and you think it's important before we move on, I'm open to that. Just let somebody know if we can't hear you. So these lichen trails also have other interesting plants growing in them, but most of these plants are cultural plantings, and they wouldn't have just popped up there, at least originally by themselves. They would have been planted, and we'll get into a discussion of that in a minute. And as I was saying, that some of these cladonia species are now disappearing. You can find them if you put your nose to the ground. But unfortunately, a lot of these cladonia trails, when I go out into these areas that are to be deforested, have already had the road crews come in, and they try and and erase them. And they're pretty good at it too. The thing is, when they erase something like that, someone like me or you who looks at that can see that that's been done. And we get down on our hands and knees and we look and we'll find cladonia species. So these are also cladonias. So reindeer lichen aren't the only cladonia species that thrive on these cementitious rich trails. There's I would say about 10 that we commonly find on them in Mi'kma'ki. And there's a lot more of cladonia, and some of them are very rare. And if you find them, they go on that endangered species list we were talking about earlier. So yeah, you have to watch now because these trails are being sprayed, they're being erased. We also, the other main lichen that we find on these cultural cementitious trails and cementitious, I call it pinkcrete sculptures, are cereocollins. Rock foam is the more common one that you'll find, but you also find an endangered one, which is called Stereocollin condensatum. And it's a granular soil foam lichen, and it's an endangered species. It's this green one here. I'm hoping that you can see that I'm circling the green one. And it's really interesting because it only seems to grow on moose droppings. So very cool. So if you find one endangered species, you keep your eyes open for the other one. And that's how I find them anyway. I find one of them and I think, oh my gosh, there's got to be a moose around here. And then sure enough, I do a bit of a hunt and I'll find something like this, which shows me that there's moose here as well, or vice versa. So we've done the trail. These are these big trails here, by the way. These big ones look like that. And now we're going to go and see what's happening here. I said that these X's represent on my model community gathering areas. So, and the reason I chose this spot is because on the LiDAR, I'm going to make that X go away. I don't know if you can see this. It depends on how good your screen is. You can see there's a round flattened area on the LiDAR and that there are paths making their way to this spot. So that's a gathering area. You see lots of paths coming together in a flattened spot. People have been there and trampled the land. So we go in and we have a look and we want to see what's there. Well, I'm using for this presentation that we find some beautiful scaffold trees there. And I call these scaffold trees, and you'll see why in a minute, but these are balsam fir. They've been culturally modified and they really are beautiful. If you ever have a chance, if someone tells you about one of these trees, you must go and see them. The native people here, the Mi'kmaq, were still coppicing trees in this way up until about at least for the balsam fir, I've seen them as young as 30 years old. For other types of scaffold trees, 20 years old is about the youngest ones that I have found out on these crown lands up for erasure. So I have had communications with companies that say, well, look, we're only cutting areas that are less than 80 years old now. So there's no need to worry about us erasing anything on them anymore. This is really fundamentally an incorrect premise because the elders were definitely out there still doing their thing 20 years ago. All right. Yes, residential school and centralization meant that a lot of this knowledge was lost, but it was there until 20 years ago, and I think it's back. So it's not just balsam fir. You see beautiful, all kinds of hardwood trees that are scaffolded. This was a yellow birch, and this is, I believe, a red maple. So scaffold burial area is what we're saying we found. And this is where sky/star burials were undertaken. So the the Mi'kmaq were part of a much larger culture called the Algonquian culture that shared a common language root. We're not sure exactly where the first peoples who spoke this language arose from, but they were the largest language group in North America. And yes, they extended to the Mississippi. And I just took this because I liked the way it showed that there was no right or wrong way to get your ancestors up into the sky for their sky burials. They were put up there however which way, and they were exposed on the scaffolding for about a year. And you can still find these types of scaffolds here in Mi'kma'ki. Just to reinforce, I'm only going to say this once because this is a long presentation, so don't want to repeat myself, is that every photograph of nature that's in here is one I took on an endangered crown land. So yes, these are supposed to be clear cut. And if I hadn't happened upon them, nobody would have known that they were ever there, except for the person who put that tag on it because they want to make sure that they're cut so that the next time someone comes in 100 years, well, no, more like 40 years with it, at the rate we're going, that these trees won't be there. So what other things can we find besides the trees? Because I'm trying to focus with this talk on the understory plants. And there's a good reason I want to do this is because sadly, more and more the trees are gone, aren't they? And what's left is going to be what was underneath the trees if we're lucky. So what we find underneath the scaffold burial area are plants like these that have whorled leaves. I'm going to only show you the most common ones. So we'll find whorled wood aster, we will find cucumber root, and we will find pisisawa, potentially. This one's much rarer. Most common, not so common, rare to find. But when you find these plants, they are always associated with scaffold areas, which are sacred areas for the Mi'kmaq. You will also find these two plants, but you will only find one or the other, which is really interesting and cool. And turns out a little bit of investigation, and you'll find out that they're both dye plants. They both produce a yellow dye. And when we go along, you'll find that the burial remains after they're taken down from the scaffold were dyed actually a permanent gold color before they were finally interred. So these plants like to be under shade, so they were preferentially planted near, of course, where the scaffold areas were. So the Mi'kmaq were no fools. They wanted to make sure they could find their toolkit for the burials nearby. So that's why you find these two plants right in the scaffold areas. As I said, often only one of these is present at location, and usually it's gold thread. But the more easterly we go, the more we see the wood sorrel, which, you know, is kind of interesting, right? I kind of theorize that Oxalis montana predates gold thread use, and I'm thinking that it might have been because when you boiled the bones in this stuff, it gave the bones and the bone meal, because they turned it into bone meal. It might have prevented the dogs from going in there and getting at the bone meal, because a little bit of research will also tell you that unless you do something like that, dogs and other animals will still go in and disturb your burials if you don't have some kind of bitter flavor in there to keep them away. So that's my theory, sticking to it. Eventually, Coptis trifolia seems to have mostly supplanted the wood sorrel, so they might have forgotten that the original reason was to keep the dogs away, and it wasn't because of the staining of it. But I'm kind of glad that the Coptis is the one, because it means that the burials are very visible, because the Coptis is a really bright gold permanent dye. So let's take a look at another reason why I'm kind of convinced that the oxalis is more likely the original. The oxalis seems to be confined to the area that the Algonquin peoples occupied, whereas when you look at the coptis plant, it seems to potentially have followed a route to get here. And so maybe we're talking about later arrivals coming across the Aleutians and bringing this particular dye with them. Don't know, but it is interesting, isn't it? I love these range maps and the questions that they ask and answer for us. So there's a few of these in the talk. So we also, in the scaffold burial area, will see the club mosses that like to be in shade. We don't see the ones that don't like shade, but we do see these three, and there's several different species of tree club mosses. It turns out, because this was a great puzzle to me, why are we finding these here? Well, they are bioaccumulators of metals such as aluminum. And aluminum and other metals are used now. I'm a chemical engineer, so this is kind of common knowledge for me, but I don't think it is common knowledge. When you have a dye, many of them need a mordant added in order to fix the dye and make it permanent. And so here's another part of your toolkit. These plants were used in the dye toolkit. Spinulum and notium, there we go, is very interesting. It's really interesting because sometimes I'll find huge gardens of it that are in no way associated with scaffold burial areas. And it wasn't until there is an interesting range distribution for the lookalike shade-tolerant mordant plants. I find them really hard to distinguish in the field unless I get down and really look at the leaves of the Herpertia, which had the spores are actually in the leaf axils. So the Herpertia, again, we see that it has a range that is confined to the Algonquin peoples. But look at what's happening with the spinulum. And this is a trade plant. It was traded big time. We find, if we do a hunch, that it was used for various remedies. The most important one was a condition. It was used to treat a condition linked to vitamin D deficiency. And the cultural information, the ethnobotany information on this comes from the Scandinavian area. So you can see that I think they knew about this here, and it was traded here as well for that purpose, because it's only found in northern climes, but it's found all across the globe. So cool. When I first saw this distribution, I just thought, oh, it must have come along the ride with the coptis. But in fact, you know what? I'm thinking that maybe the coptis came along for the ride with the spinulum. Yeah. Trade garden of spinulum. I haven't seen a trade garden of coptis. So another plant that we find is one-sided wintergreen, another head scratcher for me, until I learned that it was a very good smudge plant. And I'll discuss smudge a little bit later on, but basically what it is it's a really important ceremony of the Mi'kmaq that you open most of your cultural ceremonies with a smudging ceremonies. And I'll show you the smudging apparatus just a little bit later on here. And basically it's a beautiful fragrance that comes out in the smoke. And this is another one that seems a bit odd, but it's a twine. And it's found exclusively as well in scaffold areas. And it doesn't look like much here, but it grows. It's a vine that if you're familiar with the bindweed and the field bindweed, it's a very similar type, but it grows in the shade. And they would have used that to do their wrappings, their birch bark wrappings, etc., of the bodies. And when the bodies came down, they'd have to do a bit of tidying up, and this would have been a useful plant to have. Another toolkit plant, right? So after scaffold exposure, the human bones were ceremonially boiled in a golden dye until soft. Don't know if it was done in a pot. I have found large pot fragments, but I've also found cracked, fire-cracked rock, which they would have used to boil water in birch bark containers, etc. Somehow or other, they were boiling the bones in a dye. Then the remains were crushed and buried. And all of this is the smudging apparatus that I was drawing to your attention. So here it's usually an oyster shell, and there would be sweetgrass in there, some smudge plants that have other smudge plants that have beautiful fragrances. So the toolkit was right there underneath the scaffold trees. So where was the boiling of the bones done after they were brought off the area where they were where the scaffold trees were? Well, there were originally, before the settlers came, the scaffold trees would have been all the way around these cul-de-sacs. All right. But once the settlers came and were intruding upon these private ceremonies, the scaffold trees, we find them further and further back in the back 40s. So these cul-de-sacs are extremely interesting, and they're another cultural feature, and I call them bone crush cul-de-sacs. A cul-de-sac, for those of you that have never used the term, is basically a dead end. And the one that was active would have also had an active burial preparation pond beside it, because you have to fetch your water to do your boiling, you have to do your washing of the bones and removal of the final tissues and that kind of thing. So the one that was in most recent use would have this type of thing associated with it as well. When I go in, sometimes I see from my aerial photograph, when I go and look on the LiDAR, whoops, going to just back up there. When I look on the LiDAR, there's no signature of a cul-de-sac, but it looks on the aerial like there's a cul-de-sac. And what that usually means is that it's a more recent cul-de-sac that has not had the trampling, et cetera, associated with it that we would expect. This is what you'll see if you go to a real one of these. And anybody that's been out in the woods and not seen one of these on Crown lands, at least, I'll be very surprised if you've never seen one of these. This is where I always try and find one of these when I'm doing my surveys, so that I can camp out, usually with my car. I'll camp on them. They're wonderful. So let's talk about these in more detail, these bone crush cul-de-sacs. You will find activity areas, specific activity, evidence of activity areas on them, such as this is, you'll need a hard boulder somewhere where you can do your bone crushing. You'll see your yellow stained bone crush material on them. You'll also find around them, if it's a burial that especially that is post-centralization, those are mostly marked with eastern white pine burial trees that are less than 80 years old. And the youngest ones of those, I found one that was about 20 years old. So yeah, there were still burials being done and being marked by these pine trees 20 years ago. You'll find pearly everlasting. So that, yeah, pearly everlasting is not a weed, right? This is a really important cultural plant. It's got many medicinal also, and northern bayberry. And of course, we're going to find these cladonia lichens, which love a good feed of bone meal boosted sediment. Another really interesting plant you'll find is hay-scented fern, and this really puzzled me. I mean, it's got a beautiful smell, but why why here? It turns out this information was shared for me from somebody on Hunter's Mountain, one of the people that were there at the protest, and she told me that the hay-scented fern was placed underneath the bones before they were crushed, and it caught the sediments, and it was used as a wrap as well as the bones were crushed. The beautiful odor and scent from the ferns would permeate the area while this was happening. Again, just part of the toolkit, and then you would pick up and the bones and using this as a carrier, put them in your birch bark container or your basket, or even make a basket from the hay-scented fern and take the remains to their final resting place. Common cinquefoil, also known as Potentilla simplex, is a very common plant that you'll find at the cul-de-sacs. Downy goldenrod, pearly everlasting, pussy toes, stereocolon lichens, small ground dwarfed berries, etc., are on in these cul-de-sacs. The flowers seem to be almost invariably mostly white or yellow. Yellow was symbolized the sun and also the east. And as we know, these white plants were more to do with the star burials, is my understanding. And we see the Firecrack Rock. That's an activity area for heating your boiling water. Patches of yellow stained sediment will be apparent. Very rare to find any visible trace of bones. When they went to crush their bones, they really crushed the bones. They powdered them. And my guess is from the other things that I found here is that this was an interrupted ceremony here, and that's why there were some stained bones left. But I'm really glad it was interrupted, because until I found this particular feature, I really had no clue what was going on at these cul-de-sacs. So it doesn't help me, as somebody who's an engineer, understand the structure of the cul-de-sac. In fact, it wasn't until I came across this particular cul-de-sac that a light bulb went off that really helped me come to some conclusions about what this cementitious material was and what the structure of these cul-de-sacs and these roads was. So let's talk about it. So here, it's either a quarried cul-de-sac or it's one that was never filled in, all right? It can be one or the other. I don't know which it was, but I'm going to go with the idea that potentially they looked like this before they were filled in. Let's go with that for now. Could be proven wrong. Somebody out there may know. Hopefully they'll share that knowledge with me one day. How do I know that what I stumbled upon was the same type of material that the cul-de-sacs and the trails are made of? Well, because when I went to look at these, the walls of this feature, we had all the same lichens growing in there. We had the stereocolon lichens, we had the pink earth lichens, we had the cladonia lichens. They were all growing in there in the interstices of the feature. How do I know this isn't a natural feature? Because sedimentary rock does not sediment vertical, all right? It just does not happen. Gravity won't allow it. So this was something that was done by humans. This is a cultural feature. I walked around the inside of this feature. I was really excited. Lucky thing I was alone. And I could see that there was what looked to be maybe a retaining wall of wooden beams around it, either a retaining wall or it was a form for the cementitious material. Don't know. But it was it was going along the walls. There were places where the beams were vertical. I've been to some other ones. I've seen beams sticking right out of them, like this on either side of a central area. And also, I went to the top of the area where there was I could see there was hay-scented fern here, and I could see that the beams were actually, in a petrified wood state, actually, along the top of the feature. Now, at first, I thought, okay, this has to be somewhere they were keeping fish, and this might, in fact, be the case. But I got another idea as well, because I could see that below this feature and below the biggest of these, there's always ponds below them and with fish ladders leading to them. So it makes way more sense that the ponds were outside these, and that the dredge material from the ponds was being used to reinforce the walls of these features. And then eventually, for some reason, and we'll discuss that, the features were filled with the cementitious material. That cementitious component, I believe, was made of crushed fish bone offerings and salmon feces. If your belief is that you have to throw your fish bones back where your fish came from, eventually you're going to fill, you're going to need to dredge those ponds and those fish ladders, and that stuff is going to make really, really good cement. So I think that because I also see that beside the cultural roads that we were talking about, there are ditches that have periodically quartz-rich bouldering in them. So they would be acting as fish ladders as well. So there would have been fish going through those as well. So probably they also were surfaced with cementitious crushed fish bone offerings and salmon feces. But it still does not explain why the cul-de-sac perimeters needed a wooden substructure. It was still a puzzle until I saw this posting, and then a light went off, because this looks an awful lot like what I saw when I walked into that cul-de-sac that hadn't been filled in. And it's a hunting trap. And these look a lot like the trails that we have that seem to be leading into the cul-de-sacs. So, and again, a light bulb went off, because we know from archaeological evidence and from reports of the settlers as well, when they arrived here, that caribou was the principal food source here in Mi'kma'ki for millennia. This was what they survived on. This is what they used for their clothing. They used it for their toolkit. They used it for their meat. This was how they survived the hard winters and the good ones. But when the Europeans arrived here, they found that the caribou had no startle reflex. All right, when you're out and you see a deer or a moose and they see you, you're both startled and they take off. Well, the caribou here had no startle reflex. And what does that parallel in our terms? That sounds like domestication. So my thought is, well, if they were able to semi-domesticate or domesticate salmon, surely they would have had the same idea with their caribou. And especially if the caribou, they could see that the caribou liked these lichens that liked this salmon dredge. And it also explained why we have these really heavily well-engineered roads that the Mi'kmaq scorn and won't use to travel on, because it wasn't for them to travel on, it was for the caribou to travel on, right? So the cul-de-sac substructures at the termini of the lichen roads could very well have originally been holding pens until the woodland caribou were killed off by the Europeans. And then perhaps maybe that was when they were changed into and filled in and just become the cul-de-sacs we see today. Just to give you an illustration here, this is a caribou skull that's found along the Denali Highway in Alaska. And I swear that if I didn't have my glasses on and I was walking here, I would think I was on a cul-de-sac. It's absolutely the same ecology as I'm finding in these cul-de-sacs, right? So we're back to the burial areas. We're just going to talk very quickly about the burial trails, because the burial trails have burials along them, whereas your habitation trails only have the mound structures, the foundations on one side of the road. This is very characteristic. The burials, if they're burials, they don't care where they put them. They're on both sides of the road, but they really did care very much that the dwellings only be on one side of the road. Not only that, they made sure their front doors were towards a watercourse of some sort, because so that it was on the low side of the road. All right, they didn't build their houses like we do today on the high side of the road. They built them on the low side of the road, and they built them so that they could get to their mode of transportation. So what do we find in the burial areas? Well, no surprise, we find some of the same plants along these trails as we find in the cul-de-sacs. The pearly everlasting is a really good plant as a signpost because it's visible all year. We also will see visible signs of this gold-stained soil sediment in the burials, especially if they're recent ones that haven't had a chance to get covered over in other growth. There's pink lichen everywhere on this particular burial, and that's something that we see along the burial trails, unless they've been sprayed or bulldozed. And we also see this Potentilla simplex, and this is still a puzzle for me. So I'm hoping one day somebody will fill me in on why this was an important plant. I mean, we do have some characteristics that we know they liked. It was the shape of a star, but it was yellow like the sun. It had these, and it is a very useful medicine, but no opinion yet as to what that was all about. Downy goldenrod, a beautiful little goldenrod. We find that there, and we also find that on the cul-de-sacs. We find Canada St. John's John Warts. We also will find burial marker trees, of course. And again, Eastern white pine is a very common post-centralization burial marker tree. We'll find Mountain ash is almost exclusively, I find it almost exclusively without fail on a burial. And pin cherries as well are frequently seen along these burial trails. They also frequently mark burials. This particular burial is an interesting one because they put stones on it. And the reason that they did this, very sensible. Everything the Mi'kmaq did, if they expended energy, there was a reason. And that would have been to prevent animals from digging up the burial, right? So they put rocks over it. Anyway, what that means is that burial would have showed up very clearly. There would have been no mistaking it on the LiDAR. And the harvest planners now have to check the LiDAR. They're required to check the LiDAR. And so they very deliberately left this burial out of the harvest plan. However, the road crew came in just before I did and tagged it because they want the road to go through that feature. And I find that time and again that the harvest planners are now leaving out these important features, and the road crews are coming back in and tagging them so that they can bulldoze them out, see what's in there, and erase them. Burial gifts. When we're talking burial gifts, we're talking plants. Beautiful plants. Beautiful plants that really enjoy a bit of a bone meal boost. And that includes these plants and these plants. Oops, I'm going to go back because I think we missed that one. And I have to turn off my phone because somebody is sending me messages. So royal fern, along the waterways, there are burials underneath the royal ferns. Sometimes you'll see masses of burials and masses of blue bead lily and bloom. Even mountain holly was used as a burial gifts, and shining rose, skunk currant, and bog Labrador tea were placed as burial gifts. Red berried elder is, I think, I don't think I've ever found a red berried elder that wasn't associated with a burial. And similarly with the alternate leaf dogwood, always seems to have a burial associated with it. Twin flowers. Sometimes there'll be times you'll go into the woods and the fragrance from the twin flower is just unbelievably beautiful. I'm a bit allergic to it, so that's not good, but I can still appreciate it. And violets of all shapes and sizes. This one I've got pictured is a marsh blue violet. They also marked burials. An interesting one is this plant is the common hawkweed, which is an exotic species. But you know what? It likes a good burial. Every time I see this and get out of my car, if I'm driving along and have a look, there is a burial there. So not sure what's going on there, but it's supposed to be an exotic species. So maybe maybe the native people like it because it's the right color, and they did like to chew on a very rare endangered one called Canada hawkweed that looks similar, and was a hunting lure. So maybe they also enjoyed this plant and left it be, or even planted it on the burials post contact. Ghost pipe we've discussed before. What we haven't discussed before is that I have found ghost pipe gardens, just like I found spinulum gardens. So this is really interesting because, as we know, ghost pipe is a saprophyte. So these folks were no slouches. They knew their stuff. Somehow or other, they knew this was a saprophyte and they knew how to grow it, and they did, and they traded it. Application of crushed bone to the landscape and waters for millennia was the key factor ensuring the lush ecology of Mi'kma'ki lands and waters up until the time of contact. What does this mean for the ecology here now? Well, what it means is that we have removed the keystone species, the Mi'kmaq, from the landscape. We did it by accident, at first with the European diseases, and we did it by design when our colonization policies and centralization policies and residential schooling removed the Mi'kmaq, the native people, from the landscape. Who's doing this now? I haven't seen evidence of many recent ones. I'm telling you. So what is the expected result? Well, the continued industrial scale abuse of Mi'kma'ki lands and waters that I'm seeing and that you're seeing is going to result in permanent and cascading ecological damage up to and including desertification. I have seen it. You're seeing it. And unless we get our act together, this is something permanent. So just as a reminder, we were talking about the fact that we've removed the keystone species, the Mi'kmaq, from the landscape. A big no-no if we want the ecology to recover. Now, just going to talk a little bit about something Trump is really good at, and that's propaganda. So here we have a beautiful picture of the Mi'kmaq people. This, we believe, was done in about 1830, and it was done by an anonymous artist who is believed to have been a female Mi'kmaq woman. I took a look at some of her, there's a few. I found 3 when I went looking, and I chose this one just randomly to show you today in this presentation. And the reason why I absolutely agree that this was a Mi'kmaq woman and not a settler is because, look, she understands the importance of the Cladonia reindeer moss. She's included it in her picture. Can you see that? Isn't that really cool? There it is. All right. She's not portrayed her people as looking like savages. She's shown us the way they really looked, that they were in these wonderful tailored outfits, that they were organized, and they were beautiful. Now I'm going to take you to the propaganda. All right, here we go next. Here we have basically the same scene. This is the Micmac. In both scenes, they're away from their homes. They're into their camps. They're out to their cottages, like we do now. We go in the summer and we go and we enjoy the water, and we go swimming, and we fish, and we look for shellfish, and we stay there while the weather's good, and then we go back and we hunker down in the colder weather. And the Micmac did the exact same thing. So why do I call this propaganda? Well, what's this? We see the Mi'kmaq portrayed as they really were, but somebody's told this guy, hey, these people don't look like savages. This was painted in about 1788. This was just around the time of the French Indian Wars. So the Cornwallis and folks were scalping the savages, right? Well, these people don't look like savages. You can't be showing this because these engravings, these were engravings, and they went into to books, and they were circulated, and they were put in galleries and that kind of thing, and people saw them. They were used to sell certain ideas, right, to the settlers, that not to worry, you're just taking land from savages. So what was done here is somebody, I don't think it was the original artist, Mr. Davies, I think it was somebody else, painted a bunch of fat, out of proportion children, or they may be supposed to be adults, in their loincloths. It's clear propaganda, isn't it? There's no argument. And again, you can see that this was not a native artist, because any rock like this would have been covered in lichens. There would have been somewhere where the lichens should be and would have been portrayed. They're not in the picture. Propaganda. The ecological footprint suggests that these were seasonal encampments, and they weren't where the Mi'kmaq resided most of the year. They were places the Mi'kmaq went regularly, just like most of us do. We go to a regular spot, but it's not where we live year round. So we're going to go back and we're going to discuss the botany again, because there's very distinctive botany. This is really a unique culture and an amazing, clever culture. And they controlled how people accessed their villages. And they did this by having a front door trail between the village and the harbor. But it wasn't just any trail, it was a fern trail. And it wasn't just any fern. You had to know which fern it was, because it was an esoteric knowledge. Visitors who took this particular path up from whatever access point, it could have been your front door harbor, it could have been the stream or channel that went by your village. If you came up the right fern and not the wrong fern, or not a path that had no fern, you were given the benefit of the doubt, you were invited in, you were given tea, you were treated as family. And that fern was the New York fern. And this is a fragrant fern. And it's also an insect repellent. And the nice thing about it is, if you shift your village, you can dig it up and transplant it. So putting up a big tree, and some of these larger villages would have had a big tree telling you that stop here, this is where you pull your canoe in. And yeah, sure enough, you still find those, but you won't necessarily find your fern trail right by that tree. You might have to go downstream or upstream a little bit to find the fern trail. But if you knew what you were doing and you wanted to be safe approaching the village, you went up that fern trail. So when I first started going out looking at the ferns, I didn't even care about the other ferns. I was just looking for this one. My understanding was if I found an ostrich fern, that meant I was at a village. Well, look at the distribution of the ostrich fern. It does not have any kind of a tight distribution. So it's being spread by trade. It's being spread by other means than it being a purposeful planting for navigational purposes. And that makes complete sense. Why would you restrict it? You want to eat it. The New York fern, on the other hand, has a very restricted, tight distribution just in the Algonquian area. So yes, this was esoteric knowledge, but it extended throughout the entire Algonquian area. And interestingly, ecologists say that it's come from the north. So it's a whole other presentation, but we'll talk about where I think this navigational technology came from and why I think it came from right here in Mi'kma'ki. So when we compare this distribution, we are seeing very differences that aren't surprising for a plant that was used for navigational purposes, a plant that's highly controlled, because if you go the wrong way, if you leave it behind when you maybe when an area is unsafe, some of your relations are going to be killed or scalped, right? My thinking is it was a grandmother who first came up with this. I'm thinking that I know I'm a grandmother, and if I could make my kids leave their dirty clothes and shoes and footwear at the bottom of a fern trail after they've been mucking about at the beach or at the lake shore, and if it was a trail that by the time they got to the top of it, they had left the black flies and mosquitoes behind because of it was an insect repellent and that they were all clean, that was a trail that I would have made sure I took with me everywhere I went. So yeah, I'm thinking it was a grandmother who first came up with the idea of this fern plant. And let me tell you something else, is that if you find this fern and if you follow it any uphill, you're going to find your village. And if you follow it downhill, you're going to find your harbor. And this is hugely important for archaeologists, because before we made this discovery, we had no idea. Before I made this rediscovery, let's remember, this is all rediscovery. This is not my knowledge. This is knowledge that the Mi'kmaq people came up with. So we've gotten in and we're safe. But we came in for a reason, because remember, we're a relative. We came in because we were invited. There's some special powwow, there's something happening, and it's going to happen at a special spot. And this special spot is usually at the high flat area that's in every village, okay? And there's always a special trail that you take in order to find your way there. And because I'm a relation, I know about this trail. Even though I've never been to this village, I heard about this powwow. Somebody told me, you know, where to get off in my canoe. I've followed the safe path up, and now I've come to some kind of a crossroads, and it's leading me. There's a safe trail here. So how do I know the trail is safe? Well, it's going to be a cherry trail. All right. This is a cherry trail that Tuma Christmas and I followed. We took the we were at the protest in Hunter's Mountain, and I followed some paths with them just to show him the scaffold tree that was there by the cul-de-sac, and I showed him, you know, what the correlation is, because this knowledge has been lost and they need it back. And so he's somebody who knows a lot about the land and is able to get online, etc. So he's learning all this again for his people. And we followed the fern trail, and we came to the cherry trail. And again, we have to remember that this land has been cut again and again and again. And so these cherries are a wonderful tree because they're resilient and they pop up again after they've been cut. This is maybe the fifth time, according to the knowledge keepers that were up on the mountain, that these roots have had to push up again, and grow this trail. And that's why they're not looking very well. And when we took the trail, we came to evidence that this village had been occupied, most likely post-centralization, and had the government had come in and probably pushed them out again, because we found things like this oil tank. And then when we went up past there was a burial here as well, because here we got an indicator plant for burials. We came to one of the main roads, and above it, we could see that would have been the area where they were having their ceremonial consultations or whatever it was that they would have up there. But we've discussed the fact that for navigational purposes, a tree like a cherry tree doesn't sound like a very good idea, because birds eat it, wildlife eat it, other things spread the seeds, right? So when we go and look at its distribution, it's not going to be tight. So how can I assert that this is a navigational plant? Well, obviously, these were culturally modified trees. So this particular trail, when I find these pin cherry trails, I can see up until about 20 years ago, they have been had their cherries, had their branches culturally modified to show that they're representing a trail, and they're directionally culturally modified so that you can follow that direction up to wherever it is that they're trying to have the people gather. So the bunchberry is another common plant that you see scattered here and there. But if I see it in masses, I have learned from checking the LiDAR that this indicates that there was a gathering area there. So I'll see flattened signatures on the LiDAR. I'll see path crossings when I go and recheck the areas that look like this in the field. So these are cultural areas. And I'm thinking that the reason that they encouraged this plant in these gathering areas was because we also find fire signatures in some ceremonial areas, that especially if they are in lush forested areas, this was how they kept the areas clear of bushy undergrowth. And bunchberry will spring back from buried rhizomes after this type of a controlled burn. And of course, it's a fairly nice surface to walk on. And there's also food there from the berries. And it also turns out that moose like it. And they also, so moose is a cultural animal. So if you came here, say this was somewhere where you were going to pitch your wigwam as a hunting camp, you might be in luck, and you might see the characteristic poop that the moose tends to leave behind after it's had a good feed on bunchberry leaves as well. So there's another advantage to it. But again, this is a plant that was a food plant, so we don't expect a tight distribution, and we don't see a tight distribution. So again, how do the Mi'kmaq get around this? Well, they ignore it as being indicative of a gathering space, just like I do, unless there's a large mass of it, right? Common sense. Mounds. How do I distinguish between these foundation mounds along the roads and the burials? We discussed this. The burials are on both sides of the roads. The mounds are more regular and only on one side of these main roads. So nonetheless, there is a foundation mound mystery. I'm actually rather stumped by these foundation mounds, because they're not what the ethnography tells us and what we see depicted. They're not. This isn't what we are. This isn't what they were supposed to have as their foundations. All right. So I have to remind myself that the Mi'kmaq have been here from time immemorial. And just because this is not the type of accommodation that the settlers saw when they arrived, doesn't mean that 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, there wasn't a type of structure here that has since collapsed into itself that is not now being used as a base for the wigwams. All right, so that's one thought. There is a signature plant that is associated with these foundation mounds, and it's the intermediate wood fern. And let's talk about the fern. So why was this fern, of all ferns, lots and lots of ferns in the Algonquin region, why did they choose this fern to plant on these foundation mounds? All right, let's talk about the fern. Well, for one thing, it's unusual in that it's evergreen. So if your culture that started the idea of these navigational plants came from a cold area like ours, having an evergreen fern planted on your planted at your village sites would have made complete sense, especially since that lovely New York fern that we were using to get to the village dies off in the wintertime, right? It disappears, really. It's gone. You can't find it. You can find this plant on top of the snow, right? It's visible. So again, like the New York fern, it's not known to be food for humans or wildlife. Don't know about it, but it may have some medicinal use. Don't know about it, but it may be useful for basketry. I'm putting those 4 and 5 points in there because, as always, somebody can in the know, please correct me if I'm wrong about that. So what do we see with its distribution? We see a tight Algonquin area distribution. And again, isn't it interesting that a plant, a northern fern, a navigational plant, is going all the way down here, an evergreen fern? You know, there's no advantage ecologically for this plant to be all the way in this area. So again, it's reinforcing the idea that it was these very clever people, the Mi'kmaq, that came up with these ideas for using ferns and other plants as navigational aids. So why my confusion? All right. This is how Samuel de Champlain, who arrived in about 1610, this is how he depicted the accommodations, the dwellings, the homes of the Mi'kmaq when he arrived, all right? They look like longhouses, okay? They look like they're on level land. And we know that these foundation mounds that we find aren't level, they're sloped. The front door of them, the high end of the slope is towards the water, and the low end goes towards the road. So if these longhouses were built on them, they certainly didn't look like that. But anyway, this is a depiction. It's not necessarily accurate. What I do like about this, though, is that look, he's showing these pools beside the villages, isn't he? He's showing that they were bringing up. I'm pretty sure he's showing that they had their salmon coming right up into the villages. So the experts on Native American architecture say that the Ojibwe, which are related peoples, had a very interesting structure to their abodes. They were double layered wigwams with insulation in between them, and the insulation was sphagnum moss. He also says that they had stone foundations that would hold the heat, and they also had a birch bark cylinder for air supply. They had a roof here, and the covering was elm, cedar, or basswood bark, the Ojibwe people. This is good, but it still, it doesn't look like what we're seeing here in Mi'kma'ki. Ours, we're not seeing this sort of flat evidence of a flat floor with a central hearth on these foundation mounds. So let's go on. Now, I found this online, and I think this is what maybe was what was once here. I'm thinking that we're looking more at what they call a pit house. That maybe the next picture might be a better one. So here's a traditional pit house that was built by students at a university campus, I think in BC. And you can see here that this might work for what we're seeing. This being the side facing the water, and this being at the slope coming up this way with the road behind it, and potentially inside here because there are rocks associated with it. So potentially at one point back in prehistory, before they maybe moved more to the wigwam style home, they were in these pit houses. And it just goes to show when they say that they sprouted from this land and that they were here from the time of the glaciers melted and before, that if they were in these kind of homes, that would make a lot more sense than a wigwam. They'd be a heck of a lot warmer. This is the only picture that I have been able to find in the archives that shows something other than somebody pitching a very decrepit, unfortunately, because the people were very impoverished when they went back to their village sites and put their teepee style wigwams up. This one, you can see a wall of logs. This picture was taken, it's an early picture taken in 1893 of a group of Mi'kmaq guides and who were on a fishing trip. You can see that there is potential here that perhaps there was a pit house here. So again, it really is a mystery to me. I don't know what's going on with these. I would love somebody to, and I don't know why it hasn't happened. As far as I know, there's nothing in the literature about one of these being properly excavated and interpreted. So there you are. The interesting thing for us, of course, as naturalists is the wood fern. So we're going to go to the signature of the fish slaughtering. We are seeing, periodic occurrences all along the fish ladder of mountain maple. Another one that was a great puzzle to me until I finally figured out the pattern of this species, the growth pattern of this species. It grows on the cultural fish laddering, almost as though it's marking the course of the fish ladder so that they could go back and find it and keep it well maintained, which they must have done or they would have starved, because making sure that they were dredged was a survival matter for the native people. I wanted to show you a comparison of all these range maps. I should acknowledge that all these range maps I took from existing data from iNaturalist. So this is pretty much as current as you can get for the data. So this is not showing the historic range of the Atlantic salmon. It may have been pulled in further by the Algonquian people. This is certainly a very much, I'm going to just click this. I think I have it. Yeah. So this is the known range of the Algonquian people, the salmon colored, which I think is really cool that it's salmon colored, because this is their known range. And you can see that the mountain maple plantings are overlapping almost identically that range. The incursions into the Algonquian people's range were were relatively recent in the record, and they actually their range before these other people moved in there would have looked very much like the mountain maple range that we see there. So again, we're looking at something that if this is the case, that the mountain maple, if this is the case, this is really super interesting because it supports the idea, the argument that this culture that was so successful originated from the eastern shore, potentially, certainly from the navigational plantings that we're finding, potentially from Mi'kma'ki itself. And not the other way around, as there's still a great debate raging in archaeological and linguistic circles, claiming that the Algonquian people came from the West. But the things that I am finding, the botanical record is saying I don't think so, and I'm up for debate on this, and will enjoy one. Another plant, this plant occurs at the top of the fish ladder, and again, you'll see that it completely overlaps the Algonquian people's territory. So they brought this fish laddering idea with them when they expanded into the central Canada, in my opinion. So you compare the range; it's almost identical along the fish ladder. I also discussed that the ash trees are found at the bottom of the fish ladder, and their range is more probably of something that expanded out. It's a very good tool, right? And it likes to be moist, and it's used. It was used for the spears of the fish and all kinds of tools. So it was more likely planted there. And yes, I do think things were planted, especially if these people were here from time immemorial. I think they did plant these ash trees and continue to nurture them at the bottom of the fish ladders. And we are also seeing that sugar maple seems to colonize areas that were once ponds holding fish. So they would have they like a good boost, a good pH boost. They like a good feast of bone meal as well. And again, a useful plant, and one that would have gone beyond something that was used for navigation, but has an association with the salmon culture for sure. The berry gardens that I am discussing here are not what you might think. They're not these big climbing raspberries that I'm going to focus your attention on. They're actually cultural dwarf berry gardens. The substrate for the gardens appears to be dredge material from fish holding ponds encircled by channels. This is a really nice example that I explored. I got there from one of these cultural roads, and there was a trail into the middle of it that I took. In the middle of it, it was filled with scaffold burial trees, and around it was full of beautiful lichens and small dwarf berries. And then around the perimeter of it was a channel. And when I went on the LiDAR, I could see that the channel was wide enough for a canoe to go around it, and that on the LiDAR there were spiraling pathways of people in there walking. So just from the fact that we see these cladonia lichens and these fish ladders in here, we know that this is a cultural feature that was put there by the Mi'kmaq. And these very large, although I have included it in my inland basic representative model community, they are actually more commonly found, these very large ones, near a city site. And we're not going to just discuss the big cities that the Mi'kmaq were in, or when I think they might have been occupying them in this presentation. That's just too much to do. So what kind of berries are we seeing in there? Cloudberries We're seeing beautiful dwarf and huckleberry. If you've ever tried them, they're delicious. Unfortunately, even these, even though they're not allowed to supposedly spray wetlands, sorry, I'm just going to go, whoops, going to go back to this. These are all being sprayed by heavy industry now because they know they're cultural, and these are roads that they want to use to log these areas. So they're actually, I don't know if it's, they're being allowed to aerial spray here, and they're just by accident on purpose spraying these as well. And of course, the Mi'kmaq still go out here and they still go out here and they still gather these berries that they're gathering everywhere on these crown lands and hunting these crown lands that are being poisoned, and they're getting sick, and they're dying of cancer. They're very sick, and they're very hungry as well, because they're especially the ones that aren't on the main thoroughfares like Eskasoni and Shubenacadie, that aren't tourist attractions. They count on these areas for their meat. When I was out at the protest site, many of them can't afford a computer, a good computer. They can't afford to be on the internet. They can't afford cell phone coverage. They don't have clothing. They rely on going and getting their food just like their ancestors did, and it's poisoning them. It's horrible. We're going to quickly discuss pictographs, because there is also a botanical connection to the pictographs, no surprise. This is a nice illustration of an area that would have had a flat face, that would have definitely had some type of pictograph on it, because this is in the Algonquin and Ojibwe region, and they are Algonquin people. This is a huge feature, a triangular feature, a stone feature that I stumbled across on one of the clear-cut sites that I was surveying, and this will be bulldozer. It would have been dozed. Hopefully it won't now, because I hold people's attention to. They don't respond back to me. I don't know if they care, but I tell them about these places, and I hope for the best. Have no power other than to show them what's there. This feature I couldn't ignore. I had often ignored these triangular features. They always seem to be right by a very obvious water site, and so I knew that they indicated water, and I was a little bit puzzled about it, but because water's water. If there's some water there, you can see it. Why do you need to put a big triangular rock in front of it, right? Why do you need a pyramidal rock in front of it? But this one was so big, my head, I think, went to about here, that I had to investigate it further, and I really had to dig. And finally, I got a clue from looking at the pictograph ideograms that are used by the Mi'kmaq, and stumbled across, just it suddenly drew my eye, is that a triangle over the water spirit. So a snake is a water spirit in the Algonquian culture, indicates a bad spring, underneath the earth there. So these triangles, of course, it's worth putting a big triangle there to save your 7 generations from poisoning themselves at a bad spring. And I had come up this way and seen the little pond there and noticed that there was nothing growing in it, that there was no, because I'm always looking for things in the water, hoping to find something rare or to find some amphibians, and there was nothing there. And so it makes perfect sense that this was warning you not to go and drink the water behind there. So these ideograms are things that this is the best I have, the best boulder feature I have to explain to you that not only did they paint these ideograms on these features, because there was something painted on this. I can't interpret them. I haven't had the time to do that. Maybe somebody else we'll do that someday. I sure hope so. I hope it was saved. But what I want to stress here is that not only did they paint pictograms, they also shaped them. All right. So this map on the land, this living map, was not only navigational with plants, it was also with these big boulders that they placed on the land, that they shaped themselves, these crete boulders that they shaped, that they cut. The very shapes were also messages. And the Mi'kmaq know this. So this is a shaped boulder, and these are some of the, and it also has a flat face on it. So it, again, it was a shaped boulder that had a message just to the shape, and it also had something painted on it. And what I'm going to do now is share with you the 3 plants that have come to my attention as being important pictograph plants here in Mi'kma'ki. The first one is the gallberry, which is also known as inkberry, and it's used as a black ink and a dye, and it was also used as a pictograph paint. Very important is also the northern bayberry plant. The berries were used to stabilize the inks and to make them so that they didn't run. So this was a technology that they came up with and was used after the Europeans arrived here to make the inks that are commercial inks, not necessarily with the bayberry wax, but that's how come we now have commercial inks, is because they learned from these people this technology of mixing wax with ink so that it would stick to a surface rather than run off. And finally is the Scotch broom. And you're going to say, hey, isn't that an exotic plant? And that's what I was saying. And I kept ignoring it until I could ignore it no more when I reached this site, because it was everywhere on this site beside rocks that had bright yellow pictograms on them. So I thought I had better look and see what this Scotch broom plant's all about. And it's another one of those puzzles and mysteries that somebody should investigate, not me. I don't have time right now anyway. And just to show you, so I don't know, can you see this? These pictogram paintings on here. So this gray, when I went and looked at it closely, this was how I finally figured out that bayberry was part of the equation here. It's waxy, so you can see that you can see the actual wax being used for the painting on here. And again, I don't know what the painting is. Maybe, what do you think? Could that be a moose head? I really don't know. You can see there's some red. I think it was red ochre, perhaps they were using, but there are plants that have that, if you take the roots, that are red dyes, and maybe next time we talk, I'll have gotten to the bottom of what the red dyes are. And here's your yellow dye. So just to show you what the range of these pictograph technology plants are, they do seem to, especially the northern bayberry, overlaps the territory of the Algonquian people. So again, what clever people these were. These people were the ones that figured out that you mix the bayberry wax with your dyes that you're using, and you've got yourself an ink that you can paint your pictographs for. It was they who came from up here, from the Mi'kmaq people up here that have been scorned and abused by the settler culture. And finally, this is my last, I believe, my last little section. This is a shaped pictogram rock. I shouldn't call it a pictogram. I don't know what to call these sculptures that are actually messages. But this is a huge rock again. My height would be about here. And it was at the road, the cultural road entrance to a site up for clear cutting at Churchover Lake. And it was really strange. It was had all this pucking all over it. And I thought, what is this? Is this a site that was a volcano? Is this volcanic tuff? Anyway, I passed by this because this was how I entered. And then I'm traveling through the sites, and every once in a while I'll find another triangular rock. This is a granite rock, so it wasn't formed. It had to have been cut granite, and then this was I could see this was a coating, some kind of a cement coating that was also popped. And everywhere on this site, I was finding this plant, American witch hazel. All right, so it was unprecedented. I had never seen the abundance of witch hazel on this site, and it wasn't like this site hadn't been cut before. I think there was lots of oak on it as well, and I think the oak must have been about maybe 70 years old. So it had been cut at the time of centralization, I think. And also, when I followed the main trail through the site, it was there was a whole series of what looked like swimming pools lining the site. A really unusual site. I'd never seen anything before like it. I knew there were pits here because I'd seen them on the LiDAR, and that's why I made sure to come and investigate the site. But I was really surprised that they were still holding water. So that's unusual to find that. I've seen it once before up in Wentworth, up on the mountain in Wentworth. There's a site like that that has these long sort of swimming pool like sites, and my interpretation of those were they were part of the trail tree system to help keep the young trail trees watered. But now I have a different idea, and I have to go back there and take a second look. So here's another one. This one was right by the lakeside where if you were on the other side of the lake, you were paddled in to get to the site. So it was definitely, they're all triangular, they're all pocked. And had to double check. I went and looked at volcanic tuff to compare to see whether or not that could be an explanation, but no, this is what volcanic tuff looks like. It's more like bubbles. You could see the fingerprints in it. I mean, it was done, they had done this by hand. So the only clue I had was that witch hazel extract is a common medicine used to halt skin inflammation. And then I went hunting, and I finally found a pictograph to explain this shaped pictograph. So we know that this is a symbol for smallpox, and this is a symbol for medicine lodge. So what we have here, if we are translating the symbols correctly, and I really don't, I mean, it's in your face, isn't it? Here's a photograph of a native person who was afflicted with smallpox, and you can see it, that the pockmarking was definitely being represented by these amazing, I don't know what to call them, sculptures. And I also went and looked back at the colonial literature, and they're an Acadian artist way back at the time of all the plagues that decimated the population. Over 90% of the population, of the native population here and elsewhere, died from European diseases that really just made us itchy. Chickenpox killed them. Anyway, an Acadian artist depicted the medicine lodge and baths of the Mi'kmaq people here, and definitely sure looks like what I was seeing there. And just downhill on the LiDAR, you can see there was a huge city there that had controlled access to this these medicine lodge and baths. And so this has changed my mind about the age of these large cities that we see on the coast and slightly inland from the coast of Mi'kmaq. It's changed my mind because I think they were occupied now at the time of contact, and that we are talking a great civilization that just was erased by disease. Because 200 years later, this was still happening. They were still dying, and they were disorganized and had lost and lost their technology. And this could happen to us, right? So there's our community. I've done a highlight here in orange, and this is because I'm often finding them now completely burnt and burnt post centralization. And another clue on the landscape. You'll see red pine plantations and lots of palmier and teaberry and nothing else on them. So you might find a vestige of New York fern, which will tell you that a centralization village was there before they were removed. The people were removed and their villages burnt behind them. Ecology of violence is a term that we're seeing more and more in the literature, and there's nothing else to call it but that. And this ecology of violence continues today on this Crown land that we are calling public land, that the government believes that they can let people use and abuse intensively. This is also, in my opinion, an ecology of violence. And so history is full of people who, out of fear or ignorance or lust for power, have destroyed knowledge of immeasurable value, which truly belongs to us all. We must not let that happen again. A very wise man said that. I wanted to show you this as one of my final slides. This is one of these wonderful cultural roads, not a pothole in sight, right? And here are these big trucks coming in and bulldozing everything in sight. And I was only here for one reason. I was here to survey it because I think it was over 400 hectares was up for clear cut. So I went in and had a look at it and found what I normally found, lots of evidence of cultures, including this cultural feature, this beautiful road, which they intend and had already sprayed, so the lichens are all gone, right? So now what I'm hoping, those of you who don't know about this, I'm hoping now that when you go in the woods and love them, as I know you all do, because I've been with you, that now you'll have an extra dimension. When you go in there, you'll have entered dimension Mi'kma'ki. And it's a dimension that is full of spirit. And now you know why. Now I know why. Because the bones of these people are embedded. Thousands and thousands of years of the bones of these wonderful people are embedded there. And like the Mi'kmaq, I'm now convinced that the spirits are there with those bones. So that's the end of the talk. Is anybody with me? Are there any questions?
Well, we got a pretty good crowd still. That's good.
Congratulations, you made it. Well done.
That was an epic presentation, Mary. You really covered an amazing amount of ground.
I did, and you know what? It's the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more.
Mm.
This is the basics, the very basics. And I know there are people who are watching this that know so much more than I do. And if you have any questions or anything to add, you can either do it now or my contact information um, is available to you as well. And also Bob's, I'm sure he'd be interested as well. And Bob, you're going to post it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And
So that we can
on
click on it.
yeah,
Well,
the Nova Scotia Wild Flora site, and also just you can email Nova Scotia Wild Flora as well, and we can forward things to Mary if you prefer. Yeah.
that's great. Thank you.
A lot of material, Mary, and I tried to keep some notes, and I know now that I can re-listen to this once Bob posts it. It's something I've always been interested in, but I've just never had the time to pursue it. And I'm wondering about these big boulders that are around. And of course, the glaciation carried a lot of these boulders from place to place to place. How can you distinguish between the boulders that were, I mean, you'd have to have a very keen eye to pick out the pictures, the pictographs that you're telling us about. I'm not questioning it. I just wonder how you go about discerning the difference between what the glaciers left once they melted and what was here and part of the Mi'kmaq culture, the Algonquians, etc. I can't put it all together. I just enjoyed the talk, but it was I found there was just so much material that I couldn't process it all.
Now, I'm sorry. Is this Anne speaking? Because I
Yeah,
can't. Okay,
yeah,
good. I
can.
recognized the voice, but I wasn't sure it was
Oh,
you.
sorry, Mary.
And just to let people know, Anne is a scientist, and Anne, just to talk a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, just so people that don't know you will know where you're coming from.
Or just by training, but very generally, because I'm always one of these people, have always been one of these people who wants to know a little bit about everything. So I haven't really spent a lot of time honing in on something, except that after retirement in 2002, around 2004, I guess, I took up bryology, which is the study of mosses and liverworts and hornworts. And I've continued to this day. You can probably see behind me all my collections that have not all been identified. It's just something that has taken me by the coattails. And of course, I always tell people don't retire because you won't have time to do anything. You had more time when you were working. But that's really it. I enjoy travel and pick up a lot of birding because my husband birds, and it just nature in itself. But on our property, we only have a small property. It's 35 acres, but it's enough.
Now, I'm going to stop you there, Anne.
Yeah,
Is the Briar Island? Briar, I can't even say that now.
Briar Island.
Yeah, Briar Island. And do you see large bouldering there, Anne?
Not so much there, but certainly on the South Shore. I'm in Lower Rose Bay, and there's certainly a lot there, but not nearly like there is, say, on the shore if you go straight up from Halifax and go inland to no, what is the name? Oh dear, Ketch Harbor Way, Sambro, and so on. It's
Yeah.
just full of these big boulders. And how do you distinguish between?
You know what? I haven't had to try because the Crown land that you've got to remember, I don't have time to go anywhere other than these Crown land sites. So these Crown land sites, I mean, all of them. I haven't been to one of them that has not had a village on it. I really haven't. So they all are cultural. Everything I see, and these sites that are up for clear cutting, they're not on the coast, right? They're inland. And they're all sites that were taken from the Mi'kmaq, the 20% of Crown land that we now have, that was in the hands of the Mi'kmaq before centralization. All the rest of the land had been granted out. So all the stuff on the coast, anything that was of any sort of help to the Mi'kmaq's survival, had already been stolen from them. So yeah, so to be frank, I haven't had a chance to go and look at those sites that are controversial that in terms of whether or not they're glaciated or not. I'm thinking that now having given this talk and having had the opportunity to talk to one-to-one with some of the Mi'kmaq elders. Maybe next year I'll be able to, if somebody can draw my attention to a site where they're wondering, that I'll be able to do that. Because I think I've just about extracted every blood that I can out of these endangered lands. And if I'm not going to be listened to at this stage of the game, it's a bit futile, isn't it? I'd rather talk to people that own the land themselves and draw their attention to the fact that they have these cultural features, important cultural features on their land. Because if 80% of the land is in the hands of the settlers, we need to educate them as well, don't we? So are there any other observations or discussion or ideas? Ideas are good too. I love ideas.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the cementitious rocks and that they are, so I assume, judging by how you reckon they're made, they're probably fairly alkaline, are they? And this would be found in otherwise acidic environments. So that must affect the plant species that we're seeing on these roads and things as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Every single one of these cultural plants um, loves a good bone meal.
Yeah.
Bone meal. Absolutely. And this is why we are in trouble, because a lot of our hardwood species love a neutral to slightly above neutral pH. Our rare species like it. And nobody's doing what these people did for millennia. No one's going back and giving that pH boost to our wild, in quotation lands, right? It's not happening anymore. And further to that, the land is being abused in terms of it's being completely deforested, so it's drying out and it's being poisoned. So the lichens and fungi that are really important, more and more research is coming out that if you don't have those lichens in there helping pass all these wonderful nutrients around, you're
Yeah.
you know
It's collapsing. Yeah.
everything's going to collapse. So we have to somehow persuade people to take a breath,
Yeah.
even just to take a breath, right? Which isn't happening.
I mean, another thing I just wanted to pass on, which is like in looking at you clearly found a lot of stuff that is very intentional in its, existence. But I think I can't help but think there's also an element of serendipity that people living in these places see a neat rock, see a neat thing, and decide, well, isn't that something? So they'll clear a little way around. Like, I mean, the cause and effect may go back and forth because I'm sure they're very open to, you know, things from outside talking to them, right? And so that they encounter something and it's like, well, has meaning. Let's go with it.
Oh, yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, who am I to say whether or not, especially something that when I look at it, I can't see a cultural modification to it. But because, as I say, I'm going to these sites that, I mean, I see these huge boulders, and there's no way they are not culturally modified. They are. I can see cut marks. I can see uh, creases, like with that bag. I can see where you can
That's pretty
if you're
cool.
looking for it, you can see it.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you. I mean, I'm sure that there are others that somebody else could easily convince me it's something else is going on there. You're right. But I don't think the ones that I showed you fall into that category.
No, I mean, certainly, I think you were careful to select ones that clearly showed, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, there's no point showing you something controversial. We only have an hour and a half.
Okay.
Great place for pictographs and rock cuttings. The first time that I had ever seen them was when our children were very young. We before Keji was actually a provincial park or a national park, and we camped on an old at the fish ladder, which was, well, if you go straight in on the Keji Road, it was right there. And we found a beach that had huge boulders that had pictographs on them. It was just amazing. And it's one of the easy ones to get to. And there was no question about that. I mean, some of them were in color, faded, but in color, and the drawings had been etched in the rock. It was.
Yeah.
I have photographs, not
I
very
was gonna say,
many,
do
but
you have photographs?
yeah.
Maybe you can give a presentation of those photographs at some point.
No, I don't think so. It was too long ago. It's about more than 50 years ago. And so I don't.
Those photographs might be very valuable to the Mi'kmaq people because a 50-year-old photograph is going to look a lot better than they probably look today, right? So
They try to protect that area. And it's right near the water, sandy beach, and not that far up the beach from the water were these huge rocks, boulders, and with a flattish kind of surface, and that's where the carvings were and the paintings were, and they told a story because there was a canoe there, and there were spears and things like that. It was magical, to go there and see. And my kids, well, I think Karen was walking barely, and Chris was 2.5. So, and I don't think it meant anything to them, but it would now.
it would now. And just to bring us back to the topic at hand, if you ever have a chance to go there again, or if any of the audience has a chance to go there again, have a look out and see if you can find some plants that might have contributed to the pictograph themselves, right? It's magical. Once your eyes are open to all this, it's just magical because now when I'm in that type of an area, and that was Anne, I hope, speaking, but I'm talking to everybody. I don't see the flat-faced surfaces first. I see the plants first because that's me, that's you, that's what we are. We see the plants and we're kind of blind to everything else. But now when I see all these different plants, it opens up my world. It opens up my dimension. Now I see those plants and I look around and I see the rocks, right? I notice things.
Right. I also went on a 10-day canoe trip to Northern Ontario in 1995, I think it was 1994. Sorry, 94 in the fall time, and we followed the Indian, I call them Indian or Native people's trails because they were trading furs and so on, and you could canoe right up to a wall of boulders. I mean, huge boulders. And they were using iron oxide to paint figures and scenes of, and in the way out in the middle of nowhere, you'd have to go by canoe. You couldn't just drive in and have a look. They were there, and they were, what do you call the reddish, is that iron oxide?
Red ochre?
Red ochre, that was it, yes. So I have photographs of those. And I don't, because when you were paddling, you can't write stuff down. They showed us where the trading post was on one side, and then we went across on the water, and we could go right up to and touch these rocks with the paintings on them, the coloring, the shapes, with their fishing lines, with spears, and the people and the boats. Not a lot, but enough that you could get some idea of a story that they were telling you. So I've seen it in different areas that were kind of different because they would be different folks who were
Well,
doing it.
I mean, give an artist a flat surface, a beautiful flat surface. I mean, we know this from the graffiti that pops up everywhere. You've got artistic people that have been here for millennia, and there are these wonderful flat surfaces. Yes, they have done something to them. So take a look, right? Get your magnifying glass out, go stand further back, take some photographs from different angles, right? I mean, yes, give an artist, give one artist out of, over 10,000 years, a flat surface, there's something there. And it's really a no-brainer. But we should stop dominating the conversation, you and I, Anne. Is there anybody else that would like to contribute?
I've said too much.
I've said too much. Is there anyone else? Bob, is there anybody else that's indicating an interest in the discussion?
Let me just check the chat here. A lot of thank yous here. Thanks, Mary. It's very moving. Thanks for your well-prepared presentation. Looking forward to getting out to the woods again with new eyes. Thank you, Mary. So those are all comments. So I think
That's how kind.
yeah.
And that's the intent here. I'm hoping to give you possibly my hope is another key to an alternate world that you enjoy anyway, but now maybe you'll feel what I now feel when I'm going out there, and that is the spirits that are there.
Certainly it's going to give a new set of eyeballs, I can tell you that, going out into the field, just all these like the idea that the plants themselves are indicators of activities that would have been there.
Amazing.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, it's unheard of. I don't know of another culture that it has been established that the plants are used for navigational purposes.
Yeah.
But I will not. It's just that people that do this type of thing. You have to think outside the box, right? And that's hard.
Yeah.
So it probably has happened elsewhere, and so now maybe we'll learn about
So
that.
things when you learn to look for it, then suddenly you start seeing it everywhere, right? But you have to
Yeah,
know to look for
right.
it. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.